We had our first primetime Duke basketball game of the John Shire era last night. Duke took on Kansas in the Champions Classic, and unfortunately, the Blue Devils fell 5 points short. Let's break it all down coming up on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Let's get right to it. Here we go. Having some fun.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. It's so great to have you here with us on Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. My name is JJ Jackson, and I proudly serve as the host of Locked On Blue Devils. On today's show, we'll discuss the first primetime Duke basketball game under head coach John Shire. In the Champions Classic last night, the Blue Devils unfortunately fell 5 points short, losing to Kansas by a score of 69-64. We're going to break it all down today with my good pal Kevin Connelly of Durham. It's going to be a really fun show that you want to be able to engage with us here. If you haven't done so, we want to let you know that our show today is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe this podcast for free wherever you get your podcasts. Our show is also available to be watched each and every day on YouTube. Subscribe there as well. We're climbing towards 1,000 subscribers, a big milestone goal that we've got for Locked On Blue Devils. Thank you for your support in helping us accomplish that. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. And I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. Without further ado, I bring on my good pal, Kevin Connelly, the site expert for Durham. And Kevin, as mentioned, we finally saw the first primetime Duke basketball game of the year, the Champions Classic, played at Indianapolis, Duke and Kansas. And unfortunately, Duke came up just a bit short. Hope you're doing well, man, and glad we've got some big basketball games to talk about here.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me. It kind of felt like opening day yesterday just because, it doesn't really move the needle with Jacksonville and USC upstate. But last night kind of felt like college basketball and Duke basketball is officially back.
Yeah, big time game for the Blue Devils. Obviously, they were playing against Kansas in the Champions Classic. We've got Kentucky and Michigan State there. Duke had a big win against Kentucky last season in the Champions Classic. Going into the event, Duke's got the best record out of those four schools in Champions Classic games out of all four of them. However, Duke was 1-2 against Kansas, and now they fall to 1-3 against the Jayhawks. The game started much later than anticipated because we saw an absolutely epic double overtime basketball game played between Kentucky and Michigan State. I'm not going to say that played a factor at all in Duke's performance against Kansas because, quite frankly, it didn't whatsoever. It's just a little different when you are the team that's kind of waiting out back for this amazing game to finish in front of you so that you could start your warm-ups and amp up to game time.
Yeah, I don't think that played a factor at all. But it is. You're waiting, and it looks like the game's going to end in regulation, and then Michigan State makes a shot to tie it, and then it looks like it's going to end in the first overtime, and Michigan State makes another shot to tie it, and then you're like, oh my God, now you're going upwards an extra 30 minutes just waiting to get on the court. So kind of the same thing of the NCAA tournament or even the ACC tournament, where you don't control what happens in front of you when teams are on the court. So. I don't think that played a factor at all, but it was certainly fun to watch. In Michigan State, I don't want to get too carried away here, but man, how impressive have they looked? I mean, playing on the aircraft carrier against Gonzaga, taking them to the wire, then beating Kentucky, and I mean their schedule is brutal. I think they saw that they still have to play like Villanova and Alabama in their next two games. But I'll tell you, Michigan State unranked, they look really good this year, and wouldn't be surprised if Duke sees them in March.
A really good basketball team in Michigan State, a good team in Kentucky as well. They'll recover from this. Oscar Tshiebwe continues to be so dominant, one of the best players in all of college basketball. All right, enough of those guys. So we talk Duke and Kansas in this one. First time under the lights for so many of these Duke stars. Jeremy Roach, of course, is back for his junior season. He has played in major, major basketball games. And for the first half for Duke, a bit of a sloppy start for the Blue Devils. Offensively, not much offense whatsoever for Duke in this game against Kansas.
Yeah, and I said it, and I don't always want to keep harping back on that secret scrimmage against Houston, but you saw how poor their offensive numbers were, and now you kind of see why going up against a veteran Kansas team who's got a good defense, and you saw it maybe why that team couldn't score in that Houston game in that first half. And I mean, they got off to a good start. And when I say good start, I mean like in the first 2 minutes, I think they jumped out to a 6-0 lead, and then like the bottom fell out. I think Kansas ended up using a 12-0 run to take like a 19-8 lead in the first 9 minutes. And you were looking and you're like, all right, this could get out of hand quickly. And Shire wasn't calling a timeout. I said during the game, he was kind of pulling a play out of K's playbook. Leave them out there to die. Like that's what he was kind of doing. But during those timeouts, you saw the adjustments being made. You saw a little bit more movement offensively. And I'll tell you what, to be down 4 at halftime was a major win for Duke because they easily could have been down 15, 20 points.
Yeah, it kind of shifted in those final few moments of the first half. Duke was always getting stops defensively in that 1st half. They started to take better shots, were rebounding so well. Duke was really dominant on the offensive boards. And Kevin, anytime you struggle shooting like Duke did in a game like this, when the shooting percentages weren't great, we'll be able to post some numbers here in just a moment for folks watching us on YouTube to get a true look at those Duke stats from last night's game. But anytime you're grabbing offensive rebounds, you're creating more opportunities for you to ultimately score, creating more possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my biggest keys coming into the game. I mean, Duke was just so much physically bigger than Kansas. I mean, I don't think Kansas had a starter above 6'8", and Duke could throw 2 7-footers out there, which they did for like about 20 minutes yesterday. So one of my biggest keys was that Duke had to limit Kansas to 1 shot down the floor each time, and they had to control the glass and get those second chance opportunities on the offensive boards. And that's what they did, and that's what kind of kept them in the game. And that's eventually what their size advantage and their dominant in the paint led them in the second half to taking a 6-point lead on multiple occasions.
So we'll take a look at those Duke stats. We'll take a look at some individual performances that really stood out for us in the Duke and Kansas game last night. Duke falls 69-64. The Blue Devils now have a 2-1 overall record on the season, and they will play Delaware on Friday night back inside Cameron Indoor. For Kevin Connelly, I'm JJ Jackson. We continue our conversation in a moment right here on Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our very good friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Add your job with the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're continuing to move forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. My name is JJ Jackson, and I'm joined today by my good buddy Kevin Connelly of Ball Durham to talk about the game yesterday for Duke when they were taking on Kansas. Duke loses by a score of 69-64 for the first loss of the year. We mentioned some of these individual performances. Who stands out to you, Kevin?
Well, positively, I think you have to look at Kyle Filipowski. I mean, 3 straight double-doubles, first Duke player ever to start a season with 3 straight double-doubles, and he kind of led the charge in that second half. And it's a game where you can take a lot of positives out of it and a lot of negatives. I mean, if you look at beyond the box score and beyond the points totals, I mean, obviously the 18 turnovers are unacceptable, and the 3 of 21 shooting from 3 is unacceptable. But you look in that second half, I mean, Tyrese Proctor finally showed up. He had all 9 of his points in the second half. Mark Mitchell, aside from a late turnover, he showed up in the second half with 7 points. So it was kind of, it depends what kind of perspective you have on Duke. Are you a half glass full or a half glass empty kind of person? And that's, I think, what we're seeing a lot in this game. And also, I mean, obviously you have to point out the fact they didn't have what I think is their best player in Dariq Whitehead.
Yeah, no, in life, I always want to do things with a half glass full approach and want to try and find as many positives as possible. So to see Filipowski be as productive, as aggressive as he was offensively, the most shots taken by anyone of Duke, 18 shot attempts for Filipowski. Again, not very efficient, 6 of 18 from the floor, including 1 of 6 from three-point range, but 17 total points, 14 rebounds, 6 of those on the offensive end of the floor, creating those second chances. Somebody's got to do that, and it was really good seeing Filipowski do that.
Yeah, it was, and I think he's been the biggest surprise so far this season. I mean, he's been dominant in each of the first 3 games, and what you were hearing the rumblings coming out of the preseason was that, like, he was a step behind a lot of the freshmen. You thought, all right, maybe he's going to come off the bench. Could be 2, 3, 4-year guy. And I'm not saying his first 3 games are necessarily elevating him as a one and done. I don't think that's the case by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, it seems very clear that he's been Duke's best player over this first week and a half of the season.
No, he's been awesome. It's been fun to watch. And you mentioned the tidbit there for Filipowski, the first Duke freshman to have 3 straight double-doubles ever to start a career. Marvin Bagley had 2 of them in a row, but it's Kyle Filipowski with 3 in a row, and we'll see if he can make it 4 on Friday against Delaware. Jeremy Roach, aggressive offensively as well, 6 of 17 from the floor for 16 points, 1 of 5 from three-point range for Roach. That was the big question, is what is his offensive game going to look like this year compared to last? I remember having a conversation on this show with my good pal Jason Evans of the Duke Basketball Report, hoping that Jeremy Roach would distribute the ball at a high level this season and not hunt for his shot as much. And it did feel like at times Jeremy Roach was looking more for his shot just to try and get something going for Duke offensively because nobody really else had it.
Yeah, I got that because they didn't have anything going offensively, but I wasn't the biggest fan of the game Roach played last night, especially late. Obviously, his 1 3-pointer was big. That put Duke back up by 1. But you look at the 3 turnovers, the one coming in the final 90 seconds on a clear offensive foul, only 1 assist, 6 of 17. Obviously, the big missed front end of the 1-and-1. And I thought the shot selection from him specifically at points and also just from the team was very poor. So again, the 16 points are good, the 4 rebounds, but I wasn't the biggest fan of how Roach played last night.
Talk to me about all the charges that Duke had offensively. That was a crazy. It was insane to watch. Kansas, some of them, iffy, 50-50 calls. Blocking and charging is the hardest decision for any official to make in the game of basketball. Some of them were very clear. Like, yeah, Duke, you were a little too over-aggressive there. But, boy, we saw a lot of those whistles last night.
Yeah, we saw a lot of them, and it felt like, especially in that first half, it was like 3-4 possessions in a row where Duke was getting an offensive foul called on them for a charge. And, again, a lot of them were iffy. Again, it is the hardest call in college basketball, but these officials need to be a little better. I didn't think the officials had a great night last night, but it certainly wasn't the reason why Duke lost. But the one offensive foul that I highlighted from Roach, I mean, that was clear as day, an offensive foul. He tried to get into the lane with under 90 seconds to go to get Duke a bucket. I mean, he was going full steam. That was an easy call. But I think a lot of them were on the freshmen. And I think it was Duke looked like a freshman team last night. And I think that's one thing people have to notice, that that as of right now, without Dariq Whitehead, they don't have a Zion Williamson or an RJ Barrett or a Paolo Banchero or a Marvin Bagley to mask the inexperience of the other freshmen. They don't have that one dominant guy who's a freshman who is just more physically and imposing and just better than his opponents, where you could just give him the ball and say, go to work, like you saw with Paolo Banchero in the Kentucky game in the Champions Classic last year, or you saw with RJ and Zion in the Champions Classic their freshman year. They don't have that freshman right now with Dariq Whitehead out, and I think that's what you saw a lot of last night, that this inexperienced Duke team, they looked like freshmen. And to be honest, their head coach kind of looked like a freshman last night too in those final few minutes, although I thought his halftime adjustments were perfect.
Yeah, no, it was eventful and wild to see John Shire on the bench for a big game like this, just because when you've got Coach K doing it for 42 years, you're very much so used to his demeanor and how he operates on a big stage like this. And Coach K just wasn't there. It was John Shire's show to make it happen last night.
And especially in this game, because like we've seen Shire fill in for K as a head coach in ACC games, whether he had not been feeling well or wasn't able to make the trip. And I guess it was always like, okay, yeah, like he's just out, he's sick, whatever. But like even in
He'll be back.
Even in like the Jacksonville and USC Upstate games, it like I said, how last night felt like opening day, like those almost felt like scrimmages, and you're like, yeah, cool, like Shire's the head coach, but like seeing Shire on the sidelines as the head coach for a game against Kansas, it honestly felt like, all right, this is real now. Like he's not coming back. He's actually retired, and Shire is the head coach. So I think that the waters were rocky, obviously, in that first half. Like I said, I thought his halftime adjustments were outstanding. And just like we said, these players are going to learn from those final 4 minutes. I think Shire's going to learn for those final 4 minutes too, because he also looked like a rookie head coach in that time frame.
We're going to continue to talk about Duke basketball here with their loss to Kansas, 69-64, the final score of the game last night. And we'll look ahead to Friday's game against Delaware and upcoming games for Duke basketball. But we've got to take our final timeout here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our very good friends over at BetOnline. We talk about them often because they're so amazing, and we absolutely love them. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Winding down today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside my buddy Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham. Kevin, tell us a little bit about balldurham.com. What all do you guys have going on over there?
Ball Durham, we got it all. Football, basketball, pros, recruiting, anything you want, we got it. Balldurham.com. Follow us on Twitter, ball_Durham. Obviously, we're all over last night's game against Kansas. Also, last night, perhaps maybe not getting as much publicity, Duke wrapped up its recruiting class in 2023. Mackenzie Mbako signing his NLI. I was actually there for that at Roselle Catholic. Got to talk to him for a little bit. So you're going to want to check that out. He was also signing with his teammate Simeon Wiltshire, who's going to North Carolina. So tomorrow we're going to have a pretty cool feature on the two of them and what the Duke-Carolina rivalry is going to look like next year. But yeah, we got everything over there. Give us a read, give us a follow, and I don't think you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, I certainly would encourage it. It's great content, and I can't wait to see more features coming your way. Again, check out balldurham.com. Okay, 69-64, the final score, as Kansas knocks off Duke. And Kevin, when you look at that upstate game for Duke last Friday night, they only give up 38 points in a 40-minute basketball game. Remarkable defensive effort. Duke was really solid defensively for Kansas as well. The one big difference in this one, against South Carolina Upstate, Duke was able to play 14 basketball players. Against Kansas, you saw once again the bench shrunk and only 8 players got out on the floor for Duke last night.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to see going forward in these bigger games. Obviously, against a team like USC Upstate, you have the availability to put out more guys because you're going to beat them by 40, 50 some odd points. And the defense I thought was fine. I thought they created a lot of deflections. I thought they, at times, outside of the final 4 minutes and opening 9 minutes, made Kansas very uncomfortable. They weren't sure of themselves. But it just comes down to they just didn't have enough scoring. But in terms of your question about the rotation, I was surprised Grandison, I don't think he played in the second half.
Not 1 minute.
I was surprised Blake's played as much as he did. I think it's going to be interesting to see where the minutes go for Derek Whitehead when he gets back. And I don't want to jump here, but I think a definite conversation going forward is going to have to be the starting lineup.
Yeah, 40 minutes also for Jeremy Roach. So he played the entire game. He was always out there on the floor, and we'll see if Duke continues to keep him out there. I did want to share as well for folks that didn't catch this last night watching the Duke basketball game. Really positive news. Dariq Whitehead was not in street gear like he
Yeah.
had been. He wasn't wearing, pants and a Duke polo. He was in full uniform. Of course, he just did not play, still kind of making his way back from injury, but going through contact, which is really positive. We'll see when Whitehead is set to make his debut for the Duke Blue Devils. But yeah, the depth and the starters, everything is going to be interesting as Whitehead comes back.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's going to play on Friday against Delaware, maybe Monday against Bellarmine before they head out to Oregon for the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament. But in terms of that starting lineup, and if Derek Lively can play 20 minutes, which obviously he did last night, you would think that number would increase going forward into Friday and Monday and then the Thanksgiving weekend. I think he's got to be in the starting lineup. He's got to play those 20 minutes as a starter to replace Ryan Young, because Ryan Young at the 5 last night just did not work. You saw him 4 turnovers. He looked just kind of a step slow. Kansas would bring doubles on him, and he'd get flustered like the 4 turnovers. I was surprised Shire never went to Filipowski or Mark Mitchell at the 5, just because Kansas didn't have like that 7-footer or whatnot that could physically impose their will had Filipowski or Mitchell been there. And Filipowski's a 7-footer himself. So I have a feeling that Friday night you're going to see a change in the starting lineup, or at least I hope you will, with Lively starting at the 5 and Ryan Young coming off the bench. And then when Dariq Whitehead eventually does get back out on the floor, I think for the first couple of games, he's going to come off the bench because they're going to limit his minutes.
Absolutely.
So I don't think you'll see another change in the starting 5 until if he comes back Monday, which is an if. I'm just speculating there. I don't think you would see another change in the starting lineup until after the Thanksgiving tournament and maybe that last week in November, first week of December. And then it's a big decision. Who's going to come off the bench if Whitehead starts? You can have a long debate about that one. But I do think Lively should start Friday and Young should come off the bench.
Talk to me about this. I mean, turnovers were obviously a big thing for Duke. Have got to find a way to cut down on those. 16 turnovers against Kansas for the Blue Devils. But we mentioned the lack of ball movement. Only 8 assists for Duke on 24 made shots. Do you attribute that to more of the poor shooting, right? Like 3 of 21? Or did it really feel like Duke was putting themselves in bailout isolation situations to where they weren't necessarily sharing the basketball as well as they could have?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, if you were to shoot better than 35%, you would have more assists. I think that's natural. But you got to give Kansas credit. I mean, they do have some youngsters on their team, but they're fairly a veteran group. You have some players who just won a national championship, and they'll get after you defensively. And that's what we saw last night. And without Dariq Whitehead, Duke really doesn't have that standout isolation score. It all depends on ball movement. And again, it goes back to the youth. This is their first big game. This is their first game against real competition. And you saw that youth where when the shot clock would get a little bit late, they would go into this isolation set and hoist up what's a really bad shot. So I think it's a learning experience. You need to see the ball moving. You need to get the defense moving laterally and try and sneak someone on that back door. One thing I would have liked to see a little bit more, I know it's not completely his game, is a low post setup for Lively. Really didn't see Lively post up on the low block a lot last night. I'd like to see Duke get that going forward more often in half-court sets.
Kevin Connelly joining us here on Locked On Blue Devils. A couple of more games for Duke at home at Cameron Indoor before they get set to play in the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament. I think that good things are coming for the Duke basketball team. Still early in the year. Yes, the loss hurts. You never want to lose a basketball game in those primetime settings. I would not expect Duke to only have one loss on the season. I do think more are probably coming the Blue Devils' way, but nonetheless, we've got a couple of wins likely coming the Blue Devils' direction to kind of figure more and more things out, get Dariq Whitehead back into better health. And Kevin, I think good things are ahead for the Duke men's basketball squad.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, there's a lot to like about what you saw last night. It's almost like you hear in football, whether it be at college level or the NFL, a team has to learn how to win. When you have a really young team and they're trying to break through, they have to learn how to win. I think that's what you saw last night from Duke, and I do think this team is going to learn from that. I mean, the next real test you're going to see is that Thanksgiving weekend in the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament. But again, there was really a lot to like from this Duke team last night, despite the loss. And again, like you said, you never want to lose. You're never happy with the loss. This is Duke. There's no moral victories at Duke. But I do think while the loss probably stings because the game was easily there to be won for Duke, they just couldn't expand that lead over 6. There's a lot to like. This team is talented. They just have to come together a little bit more. And I think once the new year starts rolling around and we get into ACC play with Dariq Whitehead fully incorporated back in the lineup, that's when you're going to see this team at its best, and that's when they'll make their run deep into the ACC.
Kevin, thank you for the time as always. We'll have to do this again sometime soon, okay?
JJ, always appreciate coming on with you, man.
That's my good pal, Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham, joining us here on Locked On Blue Devils. Once again, if you haven't done so, please subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free wherever you get your podcasts. Also, watch our show daily on YouTube. Subscribe there as well. That's going to do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.